Hi! It's good to see you, Ben.
Oh. Andrew, you have more enthusiasm than is warranted for this situation.
By enthusiasm, we mean caffeine.
That might be the cause of that.
They hear you.
Okay, good.
But do they see me?
This could be just a radio podcast.
Well, yeah.
Okay. I mean, we could podcast. We could Camelot Unchained podcast. So, how's your week been, Ben?
Well, it's been okay. Just a lot of planning and meetings for things that will happen eventually in the future, and then writing down stuff in spreadsheets and planning for eventually implementing more classes.
Mine has been absolutely all over the place.
Exciting.
Yeah. I think I probably got a total of a day and a half where I actually looked at code, and it's just been lots and lots of just, we got one brand new engineer. We don't like to talk about people yet, but until everything's cool and working out.
Was it even your code, or was it code reviews?
More code reviews than my code. So, yeah. But
that means stuff is getting done.
So I'm just gonna blow up this list, and
okay.
I think
there's a lot of tech on this list.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago we had like a little rubble preview of building destruction and chunks falling off on hatchery, but it didn't do damage to anything, and it would go in a different place on my client from your client and all that, and I've been slowly, as much as I can, tightening the screws on that, and dragged it across the finish line, and that is on hatchery right now. We're still talking about what test we're gonna be doing this weekend, so it may be we just kick that forward to Wormling or Nuada or something and have a real test. And so, but yeah, rubble is there. You can knock chunks off of buildings. You can build a tower and then unbuild the base of the tower, and the rest of the tower will fall over, and it will all do the right thing with networking and fall. And yeah, there's a lot of tuning that we still need to do about, well, these two things came into contact, which of them takes how much damage? And I say those need tuning in the sense that this is like Skyrim levels of physics comedy right now. So if you want to replicate the Skyrim experience of frozen polar bears accelerating to 30,000 RPM, but you want to do it with 500 friends all together, we're in a pretty good place on that. And it's just stuff like, okay, just turn down the friction here, turn up the mass here, which absorbs what percentage of the impact, that kind of stuff. And there's one where we were just this arrow actually just carries way too much momentum into the thing that it hits, and so there's one Tuatha arrow attack that was just you could shoot one arrow at this piece of rubble and it would go pow! Because the arrow was just carrying so much more momentum than it should have, and there wasn't really anything that you could shoot with it to see that happen.
Right.
Because everything's been kind of static. So, we are bringing back a lot of the really dynamic physics, and in a way that I think is the way it should have been all along. There's definitely some regression on that from where we were, as we got very, very focused on checking off features and not on being awesome. So once we tighten up the rubble physics, but go look at my Twitter. There's some gifs of us basically playing golf with rubble chunks. Tim and I have been abusing each other all afternoon to test it out, and hopefully that'll be in a playable build somewhere.
Sounds
So
like a good time.
yeah, and once that's nailed down, you know, right now you drop items on the ground and it's just kind of a static item at that point. And as soon as like we finish all this up, I want to, you know, also take the rubble physics that are just exactly what we want and put that on dropped items and corpses.
As long as you've got the ragdoll animations to support
Yeah. So, well, the point of ragdoll is you don't have animations.
Well, just the automatic
Yeah.
movement, so you don't have a static mesh being bobbed around.
So I think what's going to happen with that's one of those that we, you know, you got to do some trade-offs there.
Yeah.
Like networking the positions of every joint in someone's body as it flaps around. Like that's not a thing we want to synchronize. So what we'll probably do for that is, you know, when you ragdoll from a server and physics and networking point of view, it's just like, you know, your torso is just, you know, kind of a capsule, and that flies around, and on individual clients the arms flop wherever they go, so it won't be synchronized which way someone's arm is flopping.
Well, that's not even a capsule on the server, right? Is it just a...
Well, it'd be a boxer.
Yeah.
Probably, you know, a box with kind of rounded corners.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just
a single object, and then
Yeah,
all
it's
the
a single
extraneous
object.
bits are client only,
yeah,
and they
so
look
like
different on different computers.
Yeah, so your arms and legs will flop on different computers, but it'll just be like one simple solid object. And,
Yeah.
But still, I'm looking forward to, you know, being able to use an AOE explosion to kill you with Tim's corpse.
Sounds like a good time.
So that's in the pipeline, but a little farther out. First, we have to just make it so that, you know, tone down the rubble golf a little bit for the things that, you know, like individual arrows, and tone it up for things like AOE. There's this one really fun thing we did where, like, we knocked some chunks off a building with the scorpion, and it was just like lying here like this, and then Tim got up on here, and I came in with a stone healer and cast a stone healer stone directly under the rubble chunk, and it shot up like that, and then, you know, the chunk just did that and catapulted Tim.
Because of the velocity of the movement of the stone healer stone?
Yeah, just the stone healer stone spawning
Yeah,
in.
it probably has like infinite mass or something.
Yeah, because nothing stops that.
Right, exactly.
It's just like, yep, here's where the stone healer stone is going.
Yeah, that's good. We're gonna have to be a little bit more careful with stuff like that as we get into physics results.
Well, it's going to be awesome though. Like, this is the game that I wanted to make.
Yeah.
You know, this is like where these things interact, and, you know, some of the places where, okay, we weren't, you know, we have to be careful, but not so careful that players can't come up with like ridiculous creative scenarios.
Yeah.
So that's
Fun with physics.
yeah, that's fun with physics. Right now, you know, it's definitely on Hatchery. We will decide and commit what's going to be, you know, whether it's going to chill on Hatchery for the weekend or go forward to something that maybe betas have access to.
Okay.
So, I've talked a lot just there. How about you take item number 3, since that's you?
Okay. Well,
I talk about my stuff, and you talk about your stuff, and then,
we'll
you know,
just skip around the list a bit.
yeah, and then we'll, like, you know, say 5 minutes at the end for everyone else's stuff.
All right.
Did we cover 64-bit already?
No.
We're skipping. We're
That's why I
skipping to
said-
number
I-
3 because
that's a-
Andrew has been talking
Yeah,
too
I
much.
was just trying to follow you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll come back.
So number 3 on the list is I finished up work on the support class design, and I'm moving on to spirit classes, which is to say that there's a on-paper design for what the ability components for all the abilities for the support classes will be for our first prototype. They're not on the implementation list anytime soon. Again, our next class we're going to be actually trying to do implementation on is mages. But this just lays out another set of classes that will give the guys working on the ability system a little bit more information as to the things we will eventually want to try to build out. And then Spirit Mages will be the next one on the list to go through and lay out those initial components.
Okay, so, you know, tell me what is cool. Tell me, for each of the support classes that you've been laying out, tell me the one coolest skill.
Oh, geez. I don't know about like a one cool. The thing is that when we're designing classes, we're not designing them by skill. We're designing them by parts that can go into skills. So I would have to like actually sit down and put one together and be like, okay, this would be really cool. So that's hard to do live. But as far as like general mechanics, the minstrel is cool because they have an interesting like 3-layer combination of like what is their like large ranging effect, what is their like close ranging effect, and then what is their like individual targeted effect that they can combine into a single skill. And some of those combinations are interesting of where they can mix in like damage and debuffs at different ranges to different people.
Let me put it this way. So there's a 7-man of just tanks, archers, maybe a healer and a mage, and okay, that comes over the hill. Versus exactly the same group, except it's an 8-man that also includes a minstrel. What about the minstrel makes me go, oh crap? They're coming to get me, and they've brought the bard.
Well, probably in that specific instance, it's the mobility. Because if you don't have a support class on your group of one of the other realms, then you don't have the ability to escape very easily because they provide speed. So they'll be able to catch up to you really fast. And then they'll be able to have a lot more control over buffs and debuffs, specifically regarding the panic mechanic we were talking about earlier, and like terror effects are caused by minstrels, because the support class archetype is built a lot around like buffs and debuffs and management of active effects, and so the ability to apply those and manage those more effectively, if you also don't have an equivalent character on one of the other realms, is going to potentially put you at a disadvantage because you don't have a way to like cleanse off or purge away some of the effects that they're putting on.
So the minstrel comes in and I can't get away, and all kinds of horrible things happen to me.
Yeah.
So it's basically Rick Astley.
That's
you cannot
there's no way of avoiding it.
They're never going to give me up, are they? Right, so how about the other support classes?
Okay, so the Skald is more of a...
Minstrel is Arthurian,
yes.
Skald is Viking.
Yes. And so the Skald is more of a melee-oriented character because he doesn't have to have an instrument, so he basically gets to use weapons. And so while he's doing a lot of the same things the Minstrel does, he doesn't get to like have the interesting layering effects the way the Minstrel uses. But he gets to still do a lot of the same, buffs and debuffs. But at the same time, he's also able to perform attacks. So he's able to give himself buffs and then use those buffs in his melee attacks. And he's also buffing all the allies around him for like offensive and defensive things in order to help mostly around melee-related things, because Vikings are all pretty heavily melee-focused. But his effects will work fairly well for anybody, for classes that are trying to get out of melee range from enemies and are trying to do ranged attacks. He's a pretty well-rounded support character, but his specific advantage is that he can also do melee as well.
Okay. One more.
What's the other one?
You're looking at me? my world has been nothing but Quaternions all week.
Okay.
This stuff is swapped out to disk.
It's all off on a hard drive somewhere?
And then the hard drive was backed up to tape, and then, yeah.
Okay. So the Dark Fool, who is the Tuatha support character, is a lot about like blood manipulation, and he actually gets a series of shouts as opposed to songs. He gets songs as well, but he also gets shouts that are on a separate skill track that he can use, so they don't share any of the same cooldowns or timings or anything. And if he wants to use his shouts, he could put away his flute and get out melee weapons as well. So he could sort of be a little bit more melee if he wanted to, or ranged. He could use a bow or something else too. But just because he has that separation, he's able to do some other interesting things in a way that the other classes don't work, because the other ones, when they're doing their buffs and debuffs, are entirely driven by songs. So they have to use the song mechanic of playing something for a duration and then switching to something else and having a limited overlap, versus the Dark Fool is able to be playing a song and in the middle of it at any point do a shout. So he's able to do some more interesting timing things that give him some interesting flexibility.
Okay, so y'all go ponder them, and I'm sure you will have questions for Ben.
Yeah, maybe so.
So I'm gonna merge 2 on here now. We've done number 2 and number 3. I'm gonna fold up 1 and 4 together because they're interdependent.
Did we do number 1?
Nope.
Okay.
So the 2 big sort of client infrastructural things are migrating from Ceph to Coherent, which is, those are both just sort of 2 implementations of what kind of started as the Chromium browser that we're using for our UI. We're still, UI is all still entirely JavaScript and HTML and all that. Nothing about that is changing. It's just sort of like the underlying implementation. So we are moving to we're getting off of Ceph and into Coherent, which just lets us manage our threading and other stuff a lot easier, and eliminate sources of stalls and things. And as in conjunction with that, we are going to 64-bit. So it's kind of, there is not much reason to put out a Coherent build that is 32-bit, and the 64-bit build just requires Coherent. It doesn't even have Chromium embedded framework at all. So between the 2, that's got to go live kind of as a group, and we had hoped to push that up for testing this weekend. They're just a little bit of infrastructural things with the patcher of like giving you the ability to check which one you want to run.
Because we're still supporting a 32-bit build.
In the short term, yes. Long term, 64-bit is coming. If you're still hanging out with a copy of 32-bit Windows Vista, like, you can't keep fighting the future. And it's we are also just in a wonderful time for PC upgrades. Like, it's reminiscent of like when the first Athlon 64s came out.
Oh wow.
And
yeah, that's been a while.
Just like there was such intense competition between Intel and AMD that they both were like trying to put out better and faster stuff at lower prices. And we're back in that era. It is such a wonderful time to buy a PC. It's also a little bit intimidating to buy a PC right now because it's like they're competing so hard that like, well, there's something, whatever's top of the line right now, the other one's going to come out with something slightly better in 2 months.
So that's on the CPU side, right?
Yeah, it's on the CPU
Would you say
side.
the same thing on the GPUs, or not quite?
GPUs have been pretty stable for honestly 2 years right now. NVIDIA rolled out the GeForce 20s, but it's really about the same performance at the same price. It's like you had the GeForce 1060, 1070, and 1080, and now, you have the 1070, 1080, 1080 Ti, and now it's just kind of 1070 or 2070, 2080, 2080 Ti. So it's kind of like the performance at a price hasn't changed that much. It's just the tiers have all shifted upwards, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So, but not the same AMD versus NVIDIA competition on that side as it used to
Sometime next year, AMD is probably going to be putting out 7-nanometer chips. They'll probably get the jump on that, and things might change then.
But definitely good for CPUs. Huh?
Sorry, Team Red. I'm still pulling for you. I really am. Competition is awesome. But yeah. So So anyway, coming back to that, 64-bit and Coherent. Those are it's really in the space of like last bugs, and stuff is just like getting found and fixed quickly enough. And like there was just this big screaming argument at the TV of, no, we can't push the 64-bit client out because it still has this bug. And someone says, no, I fixed that bug this morning. Didn't you see my email? Well, there were 48 emails about, and yeah. So, but it's one of those things where like the changes are a friendly screaming argument. Friendly. Just very assertive, but no one's mad. There's a difference. So, and it's going to be So the fixes are coming hot and fast, and I'm not sure at this point. I'm kind of in a mindset where it's coming so fast that it's probably safer if we do not just, even if everyone agrees that it's fine, it's probably best if we don't push it live and then go home for the weekend.
Yeah.
Especially when there's something cool and fun like dropping big chunks of buildings on people's heads that you can play with this weekend. So that is where those things are. It's just a bunch of stuff like, oh, the respawn button doesn't work. Yes, it does. Well, which build did you look at it in? So
we need to do some full regressions there and make sure everything's working.
I don't think we have, and I literally dropped in the rubble. So people, our QA has been regressing that.
Okay.
So hey, we got ads in here.
The tiny child links in the
the voice of a small child. So innocent and piercing. So anyway, but point being that internally the editor is already 64-bit that people internally are using. So that's a big chunk of the client there. It's dotting I's and crossing T's, and if it's not today, it'll almost certainly be Monday. That's how it is. So we've covered the first 4, and I'm gonna let you take number 5 and expand on that as much as you can, because you've been in that loop with the people working on that, even though it is a code thing.
Even though it is a code thing.
It's technically tech, but you've been much more in that loop than I have.
Yeah, haven't been watching that too closely because you're too busy making buildings fall apart. Let's see.
Next week, the Eye of Sauron will turn to this, though.
Oh, good. I think that would be a good thing. Probably a good time, actually, because we're talking about doing some testing next week. Number 5 is work in progress tech abilities. It says, we've got several people working on this task, which improves what the system can do, as well as making it easier for Ben to create abilities. Yay. This week's progress was made on editor support, converting entity mutators, fixing the way statuses work with the new abilities, and getting client effect defs up to the new code so abilities play animations and effects generated off the ability versus entered by hand. So that means we're still working on making a bunch of changes to abilities. The culmination of that will be ending up remaking all of the abilities that are currently in the game and running some tests with the new way that we're going to define a lot of the actual ability features and the client effects that will play all of the animations and sounds and particles and things like that. So it's going to be a pretty big overall set of changes, but the end result is that it will be more performant and a lot easier to edit and maintain.
Not just more performant in the game; it'll be more performant for you. Basically we're gonna overclock Ben.
Yeah, so that is a big part of this. I mean, we are also talking about having the stats completely refactored, having some more efficiency in the way that statuses work, and not having to do a full pre-flight every time you do a stat change, things like that. That should increase game performance, but a huge part of this is also making the editor better and making the pipeline better for actually making these, so that when we get into mages and these other classes, we can actually put them into the game faster, make changes faster, and get more iterations and make improvements a lot more rapidly than we can currently.
Okay. Are you excited?
Yeah, I think that it's really good. I'll be interested to see what you think of it when you get a chance to look at some of the tech features behind it.
I kind of sat in on all the initial design discussions. I was there for all the whiteboard part, and now a lot of code has been written, and parts of it I've touched, and big chunks I didn't get to. So, yeah, Eye of Sauron. It's coming. It's coming. So number 6. Another in-progress thing. I mentioned the last time I was up here that Wiley's had done a bunch of stuff to compress down the size of the particles and just the data structures in memory way smaller, so that because we found that like what was actually happening with particles was when there were a ton of particles, the main bottleneck was not the CPU time to calculate them, but just the memory bandwidth to get that particle data into the CPU and then get it back out. The update was actually not a significant part, so it was just kind of like, hey, you added twice as many cores, and that just means like they're spending twice as long waiting on the memory. So he did a bunch of work on to get that down, and we saw some improvement, but it's not quite where we want. So a little more work on that to get us to like awesomeness. And George has been doing a bunch of design with that. We've kind of hinted and talked about it, but I think George has that well in hand.
Okay.
Although George himself is getting flogged on crack that whip, George, get the 64-bit client out.
Right.
32 there are 64 whips being whipped at George right now.
Very multi-threaded whips.
Yeah.
George's in chat, so
no, the Seattle guys, they just like shut down the video screen to us and just
watch this.
Yeah, like normally there's a video, just like two TVs, they're just Google Hangouts back and forth between the offices all day, every day, so we can yell, and they shut it down and watch us. So.
Hi, Seattle.
Yeah, they all like sit around and just mock us usually.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun to be there. Like when I'm there and we watch sometimes I do when I'm there. Anyway, but yeah, it's kind of fun to be the peanut gallery.
Just watching and heckling the show.
Well, were you here for when we first pulled together the Seattle office and Mark was out there for the Christmas update that was at George's house?
Yeah, that was a great update.
Yeah, that
was what we were doing here.
Yeah, that
was the show.
Yeah. I swear to God, Matt looked so stoned. He's not. He just,
That's just Matt.
Yeah, that's just Matt. Sleepy Matt. I don't. So that, and gosh, I'll be out there in 2 weeks. Week
Back
after
out
Thanksgiving, I'll be back on the West Coast. So while he's been doing that, and that should like improve memory coherence and alignment even more to just sort of. So there's like, well, each particle takes way less memory, but now we have small chunks of memory scattered all over the place, and so jumping around them was also taking time. So pulling that together into a flat block should also improve that even more. And also what that did was it turned up some problems in the memory allocator of pushing that really hard. Because like our memory allocator, just like the basic thing that, in C++ you do new or malloc or whatever and get a new object. And we actually found some performance issues in there where it's like, this was a thing that the design of it was pretty much the design that got Skyrim to be shoved into a PlayStation 3 with 256 megs. So it was very biased towards like, how can we use the least memory possible, was the least overhead possible, and less. And that design was not an awesome design as we're getting to like 16 threads, 32 threads, all of that.
Yeah, and then we get onto 64-bit. We have like 64 gigs of RAM or whatever people are going to be running by the time.
Yeah, so I'm probably gonna, we're still kind of memory constrained on 32-bit. Just this bigger game, bigger textures, all of that. But once we're fully 64-bit, I'm just gonna. I know what I want to do to change it. It'll be a quick thing, and then it will be even faster.
Yeah. Although
slightly less compact, but.
But
we've got an extra 32 bits to be not compact.
Yeah.
So won't that be fun? I'll make you do number 8.
Oh,
I'll come back to 7.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was going to say, you have to do 7.
I have to do 7, so we're going to make you do 8.
All right.
We're taking turns here.
We're bad at doing things in order. Okay, number 8. Characters 2.0, better looking and more performant characters. More details to this? There are. Okay. This is pretty long. Part A, armor cleanup. Dion blazed through 6 groups of armor this week. Makes it easier for Joe to get through the initial weighting of the gear. UV symmetry. John and Dion worked on making the male and female models use the same UVs. So that just means that the breakdowns of where the cuts are when we're taking and putting together our character models are the same for both genders. If they're different, then we have to do them separately, but if we can do it once, then that's more efficient. Underwear. John pulled the character's underwear off and put it into its own texture sheet.
Just stop. He pulled the character's underwear off.
Yes, that is the thing that John likes to do.
Which
basically
okay,
means that it's
actually,
not
I did.
baked into the
Yeah,
root
I
layer
did
of
not
the-
realize that we were not doing this because
No, we weren't before.
that was what we we did this on Warhammer.
Right.
This was Ben and I worked on Warhammer together. This is how it worked, and I was like, okay, do this. So, the basic idea: you start with just a character who is completely naked, and you decal stuff on there. Like, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to take the texture and we're going to decal on a texture for a gauntlet, and also we're going to, change the mesh right here, but it's still going to be using that same section of the texture for that. And in that way, like, we still, you can have, like, characters that are, just a single compact mesh always, which is really fast to draw, and then, but still lots and lots of character customization. And, the thing you got to do is you've got to, like, start with a totally naked character and build that up. And I guess someone wanted to make double super extra sure that, you never see, Kin's creepily smooth bulge. So they just made the naked texture with underwear already painted on. And that was like, this was the thing that happened in Warhammer, because, I'm surprised to see that an art team ran into the same thing of like, okay, and so now we're going to do like the dominatrix enchanter class that just wears thigh highs all the time, and and so this underwear that's baked into there always shows through, and sometimes we want to give it like high waist, sometimes we want to give it low waist, so we got to put that down, we got to make that part of the base armor, not the naked character.
This is exactly what I was saying. I was like, if we want to do skimpy underwear or skimpy clothing or anything, we need the underwear to go away.
Yeah.
That was exactly what I was saying, yeah.
Yeah, no VP, no panty lines for the minstrels.
So that's a super important point that we had to point out.
Yeah, and just, oh man. And we both knew it, but we weren't on the art team, and so we didn't realize. So now
I knew that, and we've talked about it for a long time. We just hadn't done it yet because it was way easier for us not to.
We knew it when this project started, and I feel kind of bad that. Like,
no, we've talked about it for a really long time.
Yeah, but fortunately, like, I know everyone made all the art out of just layers in Photoshop, so it was just
it was super easy to fix.
Oh, don't export that layer.
The hard part is just the actual game part that says you have to have this layer on your character so that it doesn't show up completely naked, so that the underwear
so
always shows up.
So a little bit of game logic of you take off all the clothes and we add back in that kind of implicit piece of clothing.
Right, like, so that's why we haven't done it yet. So, but now we are.
Yeah, and so another story. There was this very, very. It was a studio with a lot of personality called Troika Games that I was part of, and there was this one artist who it was just his thing. Like, every single like character, monster or whatever that he made in that game, he would just like paint in the most incredibly realistic detailed junk on that monster that he could, and then like add another polygon over it to cover it up, but it had to be there. It had to be there. And that guy is he's gone on to work on a whole bunch of games that you have definitely heard of and played, and I'm gonna bet that he is still painting in the monster junk to this day.
I would imagine so.
I'm not gonna name names, but yeah. I like look at certain games that come out and I'm like, yeah. I can't see.
You'll give John inspiration.
Like, and he was all into the monsters, like some of the bifurcations and just it was monster junk. So
sounds like a good time.
So sorry, I derailed.
So the last part of this, which is very long, is that John is working through the fairly quick task of remaking the textures for the characters according to the previously mentioned UV adjustments. So that just means that as we realign the characters for male and female to have the same UV layout, the UVs have to be remade to follow that layout. And so once finished, we can begin fitting the assets to the male and female human geo, so we can remake all of our stuff to fit those UVs, and everyone will be happy.
So I'll come back to number 7, terrain mesh simplification. In order to support a more performant nav mesh in our game, hey, I said nav mesh. You might have noticed NPCs, their entire AI is basically go that way really fast. If anything gets in your way, turn. They don't actually
like,
pathfind.
It's like the least clever pathfinding you could imagine, where it's like stop if you collide with something, pick a random direction, go in that direction for a little while, and then resume trying to go toward the thing you were going to before.
Yeah, I had like a toy car that did that. Like you could wind it up. You know, I was maybe 5 years old, just wind up that car, just like bonk.
So we have the toy car AI.
Too. I mean, I don't know. Like these days, cars may. I'm sure you can't buy a toy car that's not Wi-Fi enabled.
I'm pretty sure that's how like Roombas work, right?
I don't know. Like, have they gotten smarter?
I don't know.
Anyway.
But that's about how smart our AI has been. So we're going to the next step.
Nav mesh has been happening, which not just for guards, for ambient life and things like that. Although maybe it's entertaining if wolves do that.
We'll have to make some blind depths creature that like can't see where it's going and bumps into everything.
I'm all for that. It's what was it I said a few months ago? It was quality of AI is just one of the parameters that you can tune to balance an NPC. Like, if
really powerful but really stupid is still really easy.
Yeah, is still if it has 1 billion hit points and does 1-hit kills, but it's stupid, it's still a challenge. You still have to treat it with respect. So it's like, maybe as NPCs get smarter, we will have to make them weaker to compensate.
Certainly true.
But yeah, we're not likely to go super deep on on the quality of the NPC AI in this. It's just to get it to a point where it's never obviously incredibly stupid.
Well, I think compared to what you would be used to in a lot of MMOs, we actually are. Because if you look at the AI for typical quest mobs in WoW, right, it really is just stand here or walk around a small radius. If something attacks you, go up and do basic attacks until you die. If you get too far away from your spawn point, walk back to it, and that's it. So I'm hoping that our guards will be a little bit more advanced than that, and that our depths creatures and things will actually be navigating around and searching for players and things. So we'll have hopefully a higher degree than typical MMOs, but not something super advanced where we're trying to simulate player level intelligence.
No, we're not. Yeah, not going down that path. If you want player level intelligence, get some more players to play with you.
Yeah,
we have a solution there. So anyway, in order to support a more performant nav mesh in our game for things like NPCs and caravans, we're taking our mesh simplifier, which was originally built to just take characters and crunch them down to a smaller number of triangles when they're off in the distance, and make it work for our terrain so we can send more accurate info to the physics engine. And that should rectify a lot of the problems we're seeing with players being stuck in the terrain and glitching or slowing over terrain, just because we have cleaner vertices. And also it'll support navigation a lot better too.
Is that realigning the triangles to squares or something to match up with what physics is doing, or what?
Okay,
that's a super advanced question.
Yeah, if I answer that question, there's not going to be time for any backup questions. But
This
But
is because I know how this problem is getting caused, and I'm curious what the real solution actually is. But that's probably beyond the scope of what we really need to talk about.
there's a task in Jira. I'll link you to it.
Yeah.
So, I'll let you take 9 and 11.
Oh, right.
I'll take number 10.
Continue on the next page. All right, so 9. Wand concept art. Michelle finished an exploratory pass on a set of wands and scepters for the Flame Warden and Druid. She'll be concept out more work as well as gauntlets for the Wave Weaver next week. So basically, Michelle is doing some concept work on what the focus items will be for the mage classes. So right now the Flame Warden is set up to use wands, the Druid uses these scepters, and then the Wave Weaver has his gauntlet that he uses. So those guys will have different animations and stuff to use as they cast their different types of spells, and having a different focus item gives them a bit more, personality. And these actually have different stats and do different things based on which one you equip, so there'll be some choice there as to, which focus item you equip determines some of what your spells can do. But she's doing some of the concept work for that, so hopefully we can show off a little bit of that here pretty soon, and then get these things modeled as we get ready for putting mages in.
So, number 10 out of 11. 10-ish.
10-ish.
I folded up 1 and 4, so it's 10. Art's been working on more animation stuff. Scott has been doing more mage shared animations for casting new stuff for casting projectiles, doing direct damage, doing AoEs, and force summoning. Those are going to be making an appearance as we test out some skills for mages. Even though the animations will be there even as the skills are not in final form. Then Joe has been doing a waiting pass, which is kind of like taking the geometry and gluing it to the bones. Like, okay, so here's you've got like vertices all down my arm, and you've got like a bone here and a bone here, and like it's really obvious, like this vertex is 100% attached to this bone. This vertex is 100% attached to this bone, but these vertices in here, like it's definitely an art to make sure that that doesn't collapse or go into horrible places as I move, of what percentage it's weighted to each of those bones. Wrists are a nightmare. Wrists are so hard to get right. So that is one of those where there's no, I don't think there's no perfect way. It's art.
Yeah.
Literally art. So that's what he's been doing. There's always some weird examples out there. I don't know. I'm not gonna name names. I've been playing a certain very, very, very high profile game.
That have had some interesting animation.
Okay, so I'll name names. So so Assassin's Creed Odyssey.
Okay.
So there's this guy that's your friend at the start of the game, named Marcos, and he's all set up he's probably got 3, 4, 5 bones up through his torso for his spine and all, and his shirt is all weighted to that, but then he's wearing this medallion, and the medallion should the medallion, some of the vertices are weighted it's not all 100% to just one of the bones. Really? Some of the verts on that medallion are slightly weighted to the bones below it, so that when he bends in, the medallion scrunches up. I was just oh my god! It's so subtle, but if you do this for a living, you're just I caught you. I caught you.
The things video game developers notice when playing video games.
Yeah, my wife cannot hang out on the couch while I'm playing video games because I'll just be story. Wait, there's a pixel off over there. Let me figure out what the engine is doing. What's going on with that? That pixel didn't look right. And I'll spend go down a hole for an hour of okay, so what would they be doing that would make that do that? So,
And all of this is Animation 2.0.
Yes. And last bit is animation retargeting. So we are just retargeting a lot of the existing animations we have to work on the new rig that has like better proportions through the shoulders and all of that. So we're not redoing those animations, but it's just a matter of retarget them and a little bit of cleanup.
Yeah.
So we'll have everything on the new rig. So last one. It's all
right.
you.
Work in progress art environment. Dion jumped around a bit this week, helping with the Art 2.0 process. In her spare time, she managed to create several new ground textures for some new environments. I haven't actually seen those, and I don't know what they're for. But apparently there's some new ground textures for just building environments. So making new zones, maybe, having some new...
Yo, what are the new environments?
Huh?
It
What are
says
the new
Dion is making
environments?
new ground textures.
Yeah, it's not like it's a specific named thing. It's just textures.
Is it just grass again? What?
No, it's TDD inspired.
TDD inspired. Okay, so we're maybe making some
It's
new
not like it has a name. it's
TDD
just,
areas.
There's a lot of materials we could use that just fills out the library. Basically what I'd read.
That
was
texture
like,
looks kind of familiar. It looks like a picture I took.
Oh no! Like I said, these are just new things just to add more variation. And one of the points I made is that with how quickly we can change things in the terrain editor, right? I mean, you just add in a couple new materials and you get a very
Can
different
anyone actually hear Tyler, or is it just like Charlie Brown's teacher from off stage?
Yeah,
Hey Tyler, come tell us the thing.
Before they could hear.
they
I
can
think
hear him.
maybe.
Okay. If you can't hear him, it's just more textures for the TDD.
Yeah.
Yeah, real quickly, that's just she was waiting for a little bit of feedback from Joe to do some work on Trebuchet, and was waiting for some work back from me for Elodine. And I said, hey, there's this program that you haven't gotten a lot of time with. Go ahead and open that up and work on some new materials. And then I shot her some inspiration from a couple of photos that Michelle had mocked up a while ago, and we just started making some new materials. And the cool thing about the program is it's just very easy to make stuff. It's like a beta version of Megascan's Mixer, which uses PBR photos of real world things, and it just lets you mix everything together. And I mean, she made that in probably less than an hour.
It's all automatically tiled and everything.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
nice.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah, like
I
when
would
we
have killed
went
for
off
something
stage,
like that.
it's like, it's like
Yeah, we can see things that you
Yeah,
can't see.
there people are trying to work right behind Max.
Yeah. I mean, basically, it was just, hey, we've got a few hours here where we're waiting between tasks. Why don't you go ahead and make some new materials? And she's just making some new stuff. So, like, what she's got there could, add a variation to, like, maybe a beach area or something. And the stuff earlier was for, like, some forest. It had some really deep saturated reds and greens together, just extra things. And like I said, when we've in the past, when I've, like, you've worked on a biome or something or a look, you go in and you just change a few materials, and suddenly the whole thing changes really quickly. And so this has just added more variation. And the reality is once we pop this into Photoshop and we mask off some of the colors, we can shift everything around really fast. It can be used for lots of things, but we need a lot of just starting points.
Yeah. And how is the trebuchet coming along?
So what we did is we went back and looked through the old generic trebuchet we have, and Dion's just grouping it together. I think
And that was just like a static model that we had placed in the world.
Right.
for
It wasn't
decoration.
realm themed or anything. It was just, hey, a possible siege engine we could use. So we're resurrecting that. She went ahead and grouped everything up for rigging and changed up some of the LEDs and everything, basically so it could be rigged and ready for testing.
Rigging is that waiting thing I was talking about earlier.
Yeah, rigging is attaching the skin quite literally to the skeleton underlying it, and then the animation drives it.
Yeah. So,
Is that it?
yeah,
Okay.
that's our
list.
You can hang out.
Oh.
They might want to ask art questions too.
Oh, there's not too many.
Yeah.
questions.
So we have taken a very long time talking.
Yes, that's for only being 11 things on our list. A lot of these were like subdivided into multiple parts, so there was a lot of things to
Yeah,
go.
I mean,
Well, also, like a lot of them were very tech or very design, and
Yeah.
so you had the people we could expand.
We could
on
actually
them.
talk about
Yeah.
them.
yeah, and plus, since I put a lot of these together, I had a bunch of words around like all the character art changes and the character animation changes, and that's why you get like 4 or 5 different things that we're just trying to push through. Is we've gone from problem solving what the improvements are that we want to make, and now we're just into a quantities point to
So
get
this
it all
list
done.
is very art biased because
Whereas
Tyler
like-
wrote
It probably is.
Like the stuff like, oh yeah, engineers are doing this. I'm like, yeah, Andrew, give me a blurb for that. I say, I'm not going to give you a blurb. I'm just going to
I'm going to sit down.
put it on a list, and I'll sit down and talk about it.
Yeah.
So, Yeah, it's 4:51. We've been talking for 50
We've been
minutes.
talking for quite a while.
Let's get some questions in there, and I personally don't mind going a little long for you guys, because it's Friday.
Just let me know when you want to do a 5-minute warning.
Okay. Bring it.
Okay. Scorpos 67 asks, or I would ask if it hadn't just scrolled off screen. What new things will we see in our upcoming test now, since 64-bit is now in, other than Rubble and possibly increased performance? Will we be crafting UI, a new class? What we were seeing prior to the 2 weeks, the past 2 weeks, and are you wearing that shirt because everything is or is not fine?
Everything really is fine. I am a whatever's on top of the clean T-shirt pile kind of guy. I just have enough stuff mixed in that sometimes you get nerdy references. So, to answer the actual question, there's been a lot of work on designing the next set, designing and implementing the next set of skills and classes, and that's like most of what Ben and Rob and Caleb and also the tools guys have been doing, and so that's not quite ready to start rolling out.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that's got like a long ramp up, but it'll be starting to come online in December. So people have been working, but a lot of that's not there. Rubble and destruction is a very big thing. 64-bit, the things that it gets us are no more out-of-memory crashes, thank God, and also higher quality textures and models because we're not trying to squeeze everything in so hard, and in general, as part of doing the coherent upgrade, which Matt has been working on, it's just going to be, the UI is going to be a lot more responsive. So that's it. But
this is one of those things where, to me, it's like, hey, we're putting in some big things. What else? It's kind of like a rolling process right now. We've got a couple of big things going in. Those things need to get bug fixes. We need to get it in the hands of testers. And while it's being tested, we're going to be rolling in other big things. So it's the coherent, the 64-bit, the Rubble. After that, there's all the character art changes, the animation supporting changes, the rendering and texturing changes. I don't know if I want to call that rendering. We've also got some other things we're not totally talking about too much yet. Working on setting a trebuchet up for possible future things.
Trebuchets are the principal form of moderating user-generated content in this game.
So yeah, I mean, there's quite a few things coming in. Right now what it is kind of getting us ready, at least in different regards, for kind of moving forward onto the next bigger tasks after these things.
Yeah, compared to, we do not work like a lot of studios necessarily do, where, here's the big thing, like, what is on Hatchery is what, the difference on Hatchery between yesterday and today is the progress, and, you're seeing the progress as it happens. So we got a pretty big thing in, and there'll be another big thing next week, and there'll be another thing the week after that. Yeah, but no one build is going to have a world of change from the build before.
Yeah, it depends on where you are in the testers too, because our IT testers are on Hatchery.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily push the very, very latest thing all the way to beta testers. So if you have a beta test here, you won't necessarily see the very, very latest things, and we don't update that as often, so you won't necessarily see as incremental of progress.
Yeah, but, so we'll put together a list of what is different from, what is different from the last thing beta testers saw. Wow. Okay. Yeah, we need to go back in time and put together a list.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
All right. Odilvik asks, do support class buffs only hit their immediate group, or will their buffs also encompass their friendly target, so they can assist groupless stragglers in the same manner as healers?
It depends on which ones. They do tend to have things that will affect individuals, so you can target that at anybody that you want to. but anything that is area of effect that targets friendlies is more or less limited to your warband, so that you don't have the case of like one support character supporting like an entire huge group of players beyond a single warband.
A huge group in a small space, where you basically have the ball of death.
Yeah. So well, most of their effects are actually fairly long range. So even if players are in your warband, they don't necessarily have to be right next to you. They can be fairly spread out. And still maintain a lot of their effects. But
how far? Because buff bots. At Dayak, people would just like multi-box and just have a character group up with their second account and buff themselves and leave that character back at home because it's stretched so far. We're not going to do that, right?
Yeah,
Ben?
that's true. That's a really complicated question to get into gameplay-wise, because you a lot of time had like auto-follow, and then you would have someone who would just go next to you, so it didn't even matter what the distance was, and you had concentration buffs that would just last forever, and then you could just leave people out of the fight entirely and not even drag them around with you and still have their buffs. We're trying to avoid as many of those situations as we can, and we're not putting in a lot of the automation features and things where you can just auto queue and rotate macro things, but it's hard to get around a lot of that stuff entirely, because if things are easy enough that players can do them, it's easy for players to write a script to do them. So a lot of that will just come down to it's against the rules, don't do it. But we're trying to cut down on as many of the easy use cases as possible, just to make it non-trivial for players to go through and do those sorts of things. So we still want the gameplay to be compelling and interesting, and if you have a character that's running around with your group that's just not even being played, that's just sitting there to provide a buff, they will probably just die very quickly, because these characters, in the case of support characters, are not very defensively oriented. You have to play them pretty carefully and do a lot of positioning work, and so if you just park that character in the middle of a fight, it's likely they probably won't survive and provide their effects for very long.
But you will have to bring them to the fight.
But you will have to take them with you. I mean,
okay.
we're talking 30, 60 meters, something like that, not like across the entire map.
Lotoween asks, 64 bits FPS?
It's roughly comparable. We'll probably get a little more once I take advantage of that to tune up the memory allocator a little bit. But yeah, I mean, in an absolute ideal world, there will not be any visible differences, other than just like, more memory to load higher res textures.
Are we just doing that? Because we have them already, right? We just don't use them.
We'll audit. But that's no, it should be comparable.
Yeah, I mean, one of those things where we can hit as the characters, but then we're also going to swap the characters over to a whole new layout and everything.
Let me put it this way: when you have an out of memory crash, your FPS is 0, so it'll definitely be higher than that.
Well done. I'm going to bolt because I need to kind of finish up the update, unless there's some epic, unheard of art question in there. I specifically put these two in the update today because I knew there'd be a lot of questions.
All right, real quick. Any chance for any art questions?
Ask your art questions now or forever hold your peace. I'm not seeing it yet.
Yeah, that's fine.
No one cares about your art.
I specifically said we need to get these two up here because they'll have a lot of questions.
Art is the thing that speaks for itself the most.
Jack Mode wants Fearbog beards.
Fearbog beards. I don't think we planned for Fearbog beards.
Well, now you are.
Mossy Fearbog beards?
Yeah.
That sounds sexy. Slightly moldy.
Moldy beard.
Tinnis asks, will the Dark Fool explore much of the illusionist angle?
I'm hoping so. The difficulty with illusions is that's tech that we don't currently have. But he does have some things in the design right now that are meant to make him basically make a copy of himself that will run around and distract players from killing him. So that's something that I would like for him to be able to do. It's mostly a question of if it's really technically viable without creating a lot of performance or gameplay issues around it.
Strike asks, can I load my character up with explosives that explode on death?
Some characters can do that.
That sounds like... I mean,
think the Flame Warden specifically can. But I don't know. It's not exactly itemized, but it's sort of a skill based thing. I think the Flame Warden actually has a boon that lets him automatically explode every time he dies. But yeah, there will be some cases. We've talked before, like if you look way back in the like BSC presentations for classes, there's things called death curses. Those aren't a mechanic that's in the game yet, but at some point it will be.
Wouldn't be hard. I mean, we certainly have like, just listen for a death event and
we
put a
don't
status
actually
on.
have one. Like we don't actually have a like on pre-death trigger of like if you're about to die, do this thing. We have to kind of refactor the way that death even works right now.
Because it'd be very easy for me to like have something that triggers when you die.
Yeah.
But by the time there's a death event for you,
you're
already dead.
Yep.
So
yeah, there's a little bit more complexity before
that's
we
not
can
hard.
do things like
we
that.
can add that.
Yeah, we're turning that into an event-driven system so that there's an event handler for like when you run out of health, you trigger a I'm dying event, and then the death system handles that or doesn't, depending on if you have a thing that says no, you don't actually die when you run out of health or whatever.
Osun asks, what anti-Zerging mechanics do you have in mind if you do yet? I remember it being mentioned early on that it would be handled.
We've got that's one of those things where we don't have like one specific thing that's like if we do this one thing, then players won't form giant blobs that go around massacring everyone. There's just a lot of little things here and there that we try to do to make that less than an optimal playstyle. There's nothing that says that it's impossible. You can still log in a whole bunch of players, have them all run to the same location, and then go off into the world doing things. We're not explicitly
Although
preventing
that sounds like
happening.
a very juicy place to throw an AoE.
Well, right.
I mean,
So that's the sort of thing, right? Where like, how do we make that less effective than doing other things like forming smaller groups or at least organizing your large groups into subgroups and running individual warbands. Like we were talking about with support classes earlier, a lot of the effects, like the beneficial effects that you can provide to other players if it's more than one player, are directed at your warband, so the players that are specifically in a warband with you. So if you have a whole bunch of players around you who are not in your warband, they won't benefit from those effects, even though you could deliberately use an effect specifically on any one of them. You can't benefit all of them all at once. So that means that the larger the group is, the positive effects don't necessarily scale in effectiveness with the size of the group. They are limited to your immediate warband. We've talked about how we're going to be laying out objectives, so there will be things to do in the world that are scattered around, such that if you have one big group that's going around, you're only going to be able to hit those objectives every so often with all of your players all at once, versus if you split up into a bunch of smaller groups, you'll be able to get more of those objectives and achieve more in the world that way.
But keep trading, Bid.
Keep trading is another sort of issue. That gets into progression and how exactly you earn progress, and using skills being more of an indicator than just achieving objectives that don't have any active combat going on. So you'll benefit more if you find enemies and fight them than you will if you just go around capturing empty structures and not engaging in any actual combat. So there's again, it's just sort of a lot of things all put together that we're trying to address that in such a way that we can make sure that players have a good time. The reason that Zergs aren't necessarily fun is because they go and stomp on much smaller groups, so we're trying to give much smaller groups advantages that they can do, like having support classes so that they can get away and disengage from larger fights where they don't want to be active in, and having scouts that can go run around and determine where these large groups are and communicate that information back to their realm mates so they don't run into them if they don't want to. Sort of things like that. So there's a bunch of things. We're hoping that the combination of all of them will mean that overall you don't want to just form the biggest group you possibly can and run around like that all the time, even though there are cases where we want to have huge epic siege battles with thousands of players on the screen at once. So there are times when we want to see these big things happening. We just don't want it to be the only way to play for everyone all the time.
Bumble asks, hey, has the design of any of the classes you've been working on recently changed in interesting ways since the BSC days?
I think so. I mean, I don't want to say that they've changed in their direction, but they've become more refined and solidified. So a lot of the things, when we talk about things in the BSC Days presentations, were based on the initial concepts, some initial examples for what their skill parts could be, but then going into one of those, going back to that documentation, looking through it, looking through some more sources for inspiration and things, comparing it to how some of our testing has gone thus far with some of the baseline combat mechanics and some of the things we're talking about. It means that we go from having a few examples of, you know, what something might look like to a more finalized plan of what we actually plan to implement, and has all of its different things, not just a few examples of them. And so that means that the designs that we have written up now are, you know, a lot more full and completed in such a way that you could really take this class, put all those things in the game with our new skill system and the combat mechanics that we currently have, and then be able to play it in a completed way and see how it goes. Whereas what we had before was really just a first glimpse and an initial concept to sort of show off, here's what the general theme and the kinds of ideas that this class will eventually have are. Now we're talking about what the real skills are actually going to be, what their precise definitions are and exact mechanics. And so that's the sort of change where it transforms from being a general idea to a specific list of things to actually be implemented.
Lotoween asks, have you discussed limits on volume in storage, or is the only limit going to be encumbrance?
So we talked about the limit of your encumbrance. Obviously, you can only carry so much. And then for storage containers, those containers having limitations. So you can't have like a box of holding that just holds infinite amount of things.
But I want to put the portable hole in my bag of holding.
So there, we do want to have some limitations on how much storage there is, and if you get a bigger house and have more room to store stuff, you can store more things. So there's sort of motivation to have more storage space, but it's not heavily restricted in such a way that you've seen in some other games that are really focused around you only having X number of inventory slots and things like that. It should be a lot easier to store stuff, but when you get into like, well, I want to transport my stuff on a caravan. Well, the caravan can only hold so much. And I want to put things in my house. Well, my house can only hold so much. And when I want to put things in this bag and I want to give this bag to somebody else, the bag can only hold so much. So there is some limitations there for things like that, but it's not, I wouldn't say that it's too restrictive. It's not something that we're really focused on in terms of...
What's the restriction on your house? Is it just going to be like physical space?
Yeah, so if you have so much physical space on your plot, and you have so much like allocation of how much stuff you can build on your plot, as well as the physical like volume of it, right? Because there's actually like a construction limit of how much stuff you can put onto your plot, even if it is a certain size.
Did you ever see my Skyrim Gone Wrong game, the save file for that?
I don't think so.
Oh, I stole every single piece of cheese in the world, every single piece, and I got like the really fat pad in Windhelm, and just had like, this is the room for the blue cheese, and this is the room for the cheese wheels, and just like had the cheese sorted. It was just like towers of cheese in every single room.
Because you're probably one of the few people who knows where every piece of cheese in Skyrim is.
No, I was, like, do you think I know where every tree in this game is? It's like, no, it's just, I literally, despite the fact that I worked on it, once the game was out, I played it and was like, oh yeah, here's, like, I never, I worked on the tech that allowed this city and this dungeon to be made, and there were no bugs, and that tech worked fine. So, like, that tech worked fine, and someone built another dungeon with that, so, there were no new bugs with the tech, so I never had a reason to look at that dungeon during development. So I was like, like the entire southeast quarter of Skyrim, like, I never even saw that while I was working on it. So
interesting.
I saw it for the first time, as a player. But I still stole all the cheese frying. That was important.
OG Annihilus asks, you mentioned corpse projectiles. Does that mean when we run out of ammo, we can load up corpses?
So probably not for your arrow. But I'm not going to say absolutely not for the trebuchet.
Can you somehow pick up the corpse, carry it, drop it?
Well, that's we need to do a little more design on exactly what the mechanics of loading big siege weapons looks like. And MJ's been saying he wants to be involved. He's been off doing hardcore biz dev stuff this week, and he's promised me that we will lock that stuff in early next week.
Yeah,
I'm gonna just go in the conference room and talk it through, because like everyone's got ideas, but it's not fully written down into a single, like, okay, it is exactly this, and we have all agreed on this is what is part of it and this is what is not part of it.
Yeah,
and
that's
so,
just another one of those things that doesn't have a formal
so
design.
obviously, I mean, I'm sure you can imagine I am a big advocate of if you can physically get it into the trebuchet, you can throw it with the trebuchet. That is always the gameplay that I like. So we'll have a little negotiation on that feature.
Yeah, we'll have to, I think, because there's a...
Yep, what are the implications of, like,
well, just the way that players pick up and move things, right? That's going to be it's going to have to really fit in all these different things, because a lot of things...
Right, and that gets into, well, is the way to put the projectile in your inventory. Does that mean you can put someone else's corpse in your inventory?
Exactly.
Does that mean that you can go out and find your body and put your own body into your backpack?
Exactly. Those sorts
so
of
those
things.
are the kinds of things where, like, obviously the answer is probably not. So that's the kind of thing where I'm like, yeah, we need to nail down exactly what some of these answers are. And, yeah.
Let's schedule that meeting. That'll be a fun time.
I don't know. Maybe being a corpse matryoshka is a good idea.
Tennis.
Can that be a class, Ben? Can we add the corpse matryoshka class? Like for every one of your like how many levels deep your corpses go in your backpack is like you get a buff. Sorry. All right, tennis.
Tennis asks, how are you approaching songs compared to other games? And in light of the ability builder or air magic interaction?
Geez, so comparing it to other games, I wanted to try to make it feel similar so that people who are used to playing bards and those sort of classes in other games have something that's a bit familiar.
So we're licensing the Lost Vikings by Death Clock, and so the Skalds are all going to just play that continuously all the time. Like when you're roving around, right?
Yeah,
just
we're
like
gonna
all
have to-
Viking bands are just going to be playing the Lost Vikings.
If you can convince DB to make that happen, then we'll go ahead and do that. But the way that it works as far as the ability builder and stuff, there's sort of a layering that I was talking about specifically with the minstrel, right? Was that you could layer your songs in such a way that your ability will have like a far-reaching effect, and then a nearby effect, and then an individual effect. And so each song will be a combination of those three things in different combinations, however you decide to put your skills together. And then you'll have some other things for modifying some of the power levels of the different songs, so that you can say you want this one to have a longer reaching range, but it costs more stamina maintaining it, and things like that. So there's a bunch of tweaks that you can do and a bunch of different modifiers that you can put together into those. But the just overall effect that you have a song playing and it affects people while it's playing, and then when it expires, you start another one, and the previous effect lasts for a certain amount of time, so that you have some overlap, but then the effect fades after a while. And there's some things that you want to be restarting your songs because you get an effect right at the beginning, and there are some things where you want to just let it run because it costs less to let it run than it does to start a new one, or you want to turn it off so that you can do something else, like with the Skald specifically wants to do that in some cases. We'll see how a lot of that goes, and then make adjustments accordingly. So there may be cases where either the overlaps aren't working out well, or they need to be set up in a different way or a better way to make them either do more or less or different, as opposed to just having their effects stacked. Normally you could have a different effect that happens if two things interact with each other. There aren't really a lot of specific like air system style interactions with the internal workings of each class, but there are interactions when you get into like the way that other classes' abilities will interact with the song type abilities, because they're based on like mind magic, I think, most of them, and so anything that interacts with mind will interact with songs. So that sort of works that way, but again, it's not implemented yet. It's not even in first prototype stage. So once it gets into game and we start trying it out, then we'll be a lot closer to understanding what's good and what's bad about it, and know what we need to change in order to make these be really fun classes and really fit in with the rest of the game.
Hellweir asks, hey, how much variation will there be in builds of the same class? We know there's a lot of variation of capability in the crafter class. I'm wondering how much this is also true in the combat classes.
So if you go back, way back in the things that we've talked about here on the live streams and in releases and stuff, you'll remember that we talked about a path system quite a long time ago. And this was when we were talking about having a fairly small number of classes and having each one have different paths that they could go down, and each path being like vastly different from each other. And we decided to move away from that because it allowed us to get the same sort of differences, where there's differences in play styles, into different classes as opposed to different paths within the same class, meaning that because they're different classes entirely, they could have vastly different mechanics that are incompatible with each other, and they have more strong thematics, so that we could say, you know, there's a difference between like a Hellbound and a Stone Healer, and so they have very different mechanics, they have different thematic elements to them, and they play very differently. But each one of them now, as we have 30 different classes in the game, each one of those classes is not able to diverge to that amount where you have like a completely different play style of somebody who's the same class. You have a lot of customization possible, but you can't really reach outside of your designated world. Now that's a little bit less true for some classes than it is for others. Archers, for example, are very focused on shooting bows and don't necessarily have like a path where they can go be a melee character, with sort of a somewhat exception of the Winter Shadow. But for the most part, they're a little bit more linear versus like if you get into the devout classes, right, where they're partially a healer and partially a mage, they can sort of lean a lot more heavily in one direction or the other, and so they have a bit more of a choice as far as, do I want to be more damage focused or do I want to be more like healing focused, and which one of those do I want to go down? And someone might pick one way and someone might pick the other way, and then as you see those classes running around, you'll have a very different experience facing or grouping with one or the other of those choices. So there's a little bit of that, but again, at the end of the day, those classes are still relatively linear in what they're going to do. They're not going to get to the point where you have like you know, a healer that goes completely to become a damage class. Like, that's not a thing that we have. Healers are healers, damage characters are damage characters, and that's sort of what they do, with a limited amount of flexibility between them, with some classes having more than others.
Odelvik asks, just now, the player allocated stats seem to have a minimal impact on how the characters perform in game. Will the stats at a later date have a greater impact so we can mess up our builds as suggested in the foundational principles?
So you want to mess up your build? Yeah, right now the stats don't have a huge influence, but they're not really supposed to. I mean, again, one of the important design aspects of this game that we've talked about for a very long time is limited vertical progression. We want to have it be a mostly horizontal progression game, and if stats mean a whole lot, where a character starts off with, you know, 10,000 health and ends up with 100,000 health, like, that is not a horizontal progression game, that is a vertical progression game. So we can't have these stats meaning a whole lot to your character directly, where your character just literally gets better, which is what stat progression is. We want to put most of the progression into choices, so that you have picking a different set of abilities by, you know, earning mastery over your components, and then going out and learning new components that you can add in to create new abilities, and those abilities doing different things, making your character better and more customized to your playstyle that way, as opposed to just making things better and better and stronger in terms of their raw power level, like things, health, damage, that sort of thing, that are just going to scale and make your character stronger than other characters. The thing that stats are missing right now, in large part, is to do with crafting and itemization. So right now you will see that you can get more strength, but there's no way to get a heavier sword that requires higher strength. Once we have that, it takes a little bit more work in our crafting system. As you've seen in some of our previous updates, we're redoing the UI for crafting. We're also going to be redoing some of the behind-the-scenes number factoring for crafting in order to enable us to make things that actually have dynamic scaling based on the material inputs into the items that you make, which ultimately will mean you can have a sword that is better in terms of its stats because it requires more strength, which means that having more strength will have the indirect benefit of allowing you to equip and use a better sword that does do more damage. And so you'll see more scaling and usefulness out of your stats that way eventually. But again, we don't want to make stats directly responsible for a lot more power creep because then they have to stack with all of the other sources of power in the game in such a way that we have to deal with the huge disparity between very experienced players and very new players. So that's sort of why you don't see a huge amount of gain from direct stat increases right now.
Tinnis asks, will any of the supports feature the traditions of counterspell or spell stealing or magic reflection?
Counterspell, definitely. Spell stealing is a bit tricky. There might be a way to do that. We'll have to see a little bit about those things.
Okay.
Spell reflection is not part of what the support classes do, but that's something that you might see in other classes where they can actually bounce back things, specifically regarding the way that the interaction system works and the way physics works, just because things can bounce, and that's
spells
the
are
thing that
projectiles.
that's just a thing that can happen in the way that the physics system allows.
By the way, we've been doing questions for a half hour now, so I
That's
probably should have called
close to
5
enough
minutes
questions.
5 minutes ago. So I'll call 5 minutes now.
Okay.
Okay, 5-minute warning, folks. We're looking for a nice question to end on. Let's see. Man, there was actually a legit art question that I didn't see before. I missed it.
Should we?
We'll ask it next time Tyler's
Yeah,
on.
we'll have an art stream next week.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Let's see.
Thanksgiving art stream.
Have to be on Wednesday, yeah.
Strike wants to know, can I run my exploding flame ward into a wall and redo the Helm's Deep battle?
So the Helm's Deep battle has been kind of one of my benchmarks of just like that instant when the bomb goes off and you've got, a few hundred characters on top of the wall and a few thousand characters out in the field, and just say, okay, those are all networked players, and this happens, and it's real, and it's physics, and it's networking, and yeah, that has been one of my benchmarks, and we're getting there. We are zeroing in closer and closer, and I'm gonna say, now I cannot guarantee you that exact ability will be in the game, but yeah, that is a thing that should be able to happen.
All right, Lodoween has a nice timely question that might be good to end with. Lodoween asks, what recent addition to the game are each of you most thankful for?
That you did not work on yourself.
Oh, okay.
What you got, Ben?
So, let's see, things that are already added. That's difficult to say, because right now we have so many things that are in the midst of being worked on. As we go through these lists and say, like, well, the changes to the ability system are things that have been in progress and been in progress for so long that we haven't. I'm trying to think of what even has gone in the recent future that's like a new and exciting thing. We've had like bug fixes and stuff that I think are some of them have been really good. Coherent, I guess, is sort of in now, I guess we could say.
Yeah, it's in the final bug fix phase. For me, it's this is like the most nerdy thing ever. When we convert immutable entities into updaters, Caleb added an owner field to it so that entity component updaters know who the owning entity is, and that just like let us get rid of all these extra parameters that you had to pass all over the place. Of like, like you called a function on an entity component updater, and you had to always pass in the owning entity, and now you don't. It's just makes so much code just like that 5% cleaner through like all the gameplay logic in the server. So that is a really asinine answer, but it is also just like, in terms of actual direct physics, actually, so Colin also finished up the building server, and I'm very thankful for that. That I'm not sure why that did not make the top 10 list. I guess Colin is just, likes being quiet and competent, and did not yell at Tyler, "Hey, I finished this." So we will turn that on. We're not going to turn that on until after Thanksgiving because he's taking a long break to just for the holiday. He's taking
until he's here to fix it.
Yeah, he's taking his week of vacation during Thanksgiving so he can hang out. I'm not sure what it's. Colin Land.
Yep.
But yeah, so once he gets back from that, I guess he and I will turn it on together in Seattle that week.
Yeah. I think I will say the disc lights, because going from the old lights to the new lights and the way that especially the light poles and stuff work, and if you're running around in the home islands and stuff, looks so much better. And we've had such problems with lighting for so long, and getting the fall off to look right and things. That is super good, and I'm really happy with the way that that's going.
Yeah, it was kind of a very old school lighting model where every light was just like an infinitely small point. So like if the light was this infinitely small point right here, like whether I moved from right here to right here would, like this much would completely change the angle. And now lights actually are reflected as literally reflected in the world as a real volume.
Yeah.
And also that's affected the art too of like, I think people were making surfaces rougher than they were because like, the sun's like, the sun like occupies like a decent amount of width. And so the highlight of the sun also should occupy a decent amount of width. And people were making painting surfaces like they were rougher than they should have been to like compensate for that. And so that was like interacting with other things in weird ways. So, being able to tone down the surface roughness because like the sun has actual width. And also just like the moon on the water. It's not like a stripe. It's what the moon on the water should look like.
We're very thankful for lots of things. Shall we wrap this up?
Yeah.
Wrap up the wrap up?
Yeah,
Wrap up the wrap up. And last question for you. Metal album of the week. What are you listening to?
Of the week?
Not that came out, but what are
okay.
you
I don't
rocking
know
out
what
to
came
this
out
week?
I've been designing like Viking classes, so I'm on a Marth.
So, okay. Death Clock, Lost Vikings. Totally Variags of Midgard, right? By Amon Amarth. They just like ripped the riff right out of there and Death Clocked it.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
It's good to have inspiration.
So, me, Voivod, The Wake.
I don't
It's
know
like,
that one.
yeah, they're this weird Canadian prog thrash band, but like they put out this new album. They've been going for like 30 years, and they just put out this new album that's like inexplicably charting in Germany of like totally obscure but suddenly popular.
Huh.
It's really good. It's just like weird space metal.
What was the one you linked in chat the other day?
Dire Peril.
Yeah, that one was pretty good.
Yeah, that was fun. That's just like, it's like what Iced Earth aspires to be. Yeah, it's just straight up power metal, a little bit of thrash. Every song is like written about a different sci-fi. Like there's one about The Thing, and yeah, it's every single thing. So yeah, nerd metal.
Yep.
You got Viking metal and you got space metal. So with that, we will see you next week. Well, probably I don't know. We might do a Wednesday update.
Yeah, I think
Pre-turkey update.
We might have to do a turkey update.
We'll do a turkey update. And you never know what might happen over Thanksgiving because the building code appeared out of nowhere while I was sitting around waiting for the turkey to get cooked.
All right, we'll see you later, and keep an eye out for our update email.
Yep.
Yep. All right. Bye, guys.